So when I was 4 years old, my mother almost died. I was born in a middle-class family in Philadelphia. My dad was a businessman, my mom was a writer. And when I was 4, we moved to the suburbs to get closer to his new job. Now, unbeknownst to us, in this new house in the suburbs, the gas company had installed a furnace that leaked carbon monoxide. Now, this is 30-some years ago. You couldn't go to Walmart or Home Depot and buy the detector. So we all start to get sick as we're breathing these invisible fumes in our house. And on New Year's Day, my mom walks across the bedroom and she collapses unconscious. We rush her to the hospital. After a long series of tests, the doctors find these massive amounts of carboxyhemoglobin, carbon monoxide, in her blood. My dad rips out the heater. He finds the cracks himself. And from this moment on, my mom was never the same again. I watched as a 4-year-old my mom go from this healthy, vibrant, amazing mother, writer, wife to an invalid. Her immune system was irreparably destroyed by the carbon monoxide, and she was never the same again, and she would wear charcoal masks. She would be connected to oxygen. Everything from this point that was chemical made her sick, whether it was car fumes, whether it was perfume. I remember the ink from books would make her sick. So if she wanted to read, I would bake her books in the oven to try to get the smell of the printout, and then I would take them upstairs to the bathroom where she lived, and the bathroom was covered in aluminum foil, and she was sleeping on an army cot that had been washed 20 times in baking soda. And then if she had this mask on and a cellophane bag and cotton gloves, she could read the book that I had baked for her. My parents had a deep Christian faith. They decided not to sue the gas company for gross negligence. They didn't want to become bitter. And they believed that God would provide for our family. So family planning stopped. I grew up an only child. I was a really good Christian kid. I played by all the rules. I didn't smoke. I didn't drink. I didn't have sex. I didn't curse. I didn't do anything. I played piano in church on Sundays. And I took care of mom. I did the cooking and the cleaning and until the age of 18. Then I discovered New York City. And I had this moment, it's my turn now. I've played by the rules. I've been the good son. Now it's time to go have some fun. So I grew my hair down to my shoulders. I joined a band, and the band immediately broke up because we all hated each other. But I realized that there was this incredible job where if you wanted to rebel, you could rebel in style as a nightclub promoter. You could get paid to drink alcohol for free. This was a job. And if you got the right people inside the right nightclubs, you could charge people $20 for a drink. $800 for a bottle of champagne that costs $40. So the next 10 years of my life slipped away in a bit of a blur. This photo is taken 10 years later. I'm 28, I'm in some VIP room in New York City, and what's so sad about this photo is it shows the condition of my soul, and what I think is important at the time, which is the Rolex watch that I'm pretentiously showing a club photographer I've never met. It was a little darker at noon the next day, at some horrible after hours over plates of cocaine. So after 10 years, I'd walked away from the foundation of any shred of spirituality or morality. I'd smoked 2 packs a day of cigarettes for 10 years. I had a gambling problem. I had a pornography problem. I had a strip club problem. Every drug short of heroin, and my life was a mess, except it looked great on the outside. And I had this moment in Punta del Este in South America where I had ticked off the things in my life that I thought would make me happy. I had a Rolex, I had a BMW. My girlfriend was on the cover of Elle magazine at the time. I had a grand piano in my New York apartment. I drank for a living. And I realized I had become the worst person I knew. I was emotionally bankrupt. I was spiritually bankrupt. And if I continued down this path, the legacy that I would leave would simply, and my tombstone would read, "Here lies a man who got 1 million people wasted." And I needed to make a change. I tried to find my way back to a very lost Christian faith. I started reading deep theology while hungover during the days. And this push-pull began, and I came back to New York, and I struggled to find my way back to church, find my way back to morality. And about 6 months later, I just sold everything I owned. I put 2,000 DVDs up on eBay in a single lot, trying to purge my old life. And I began to apply to the most famous humanitarian organizations of the world, and the idea was that I could do 1 year of humanitarian service, a tithe for the 10 years that I'd selfishly wasted. This probably will not surprise you, but no one would take me. I'm denied by every organization. Finally, one says if I was willing to pay them $500 a month and go live in post-war Liberia, I could join their mission. And this is where I met Chris. So everything changed for me. I realized that, I needed to walk in the opposite direction. I had to quit smoking and quit drugs and never smoke again and never gamble again. And I quit porn. I quit every single thing in my life because I wanted to search after unselfishness, after a pure lifestyle. So I joined this hospital ship, as Chris mentioned, a huge 500-foot ship, 350 doctors and surgeons who had come to operate on the poor for free. And in the country, Liberia, there was one doctor for every 50,000 citizens. Here, our ratio is about 1 to 180. And people were living in bombed-out apartment buildings, houses that had once been beautiful but destroyed by the 14-year Civil War led by Charles Taylor and his child soldiers. There was no electricity in the country. There was no running water. There was no sewage. You couldn't send a letter to anyone in Liberia. So before our ship came into the port, an advance team would fly around the country looking for sick patients, looking for people with massive facial tumors, people who had flesh-eating disease, people who'd been burned during the war with their arms or their legs fused together, people born with cleft lips and cleft palates. We said, if you've got one of these conditions, turn up on this day, and maybe our doctors can help you. My third day on this mission, I put on hospital scrubs. At 5 in the morning, I grabbed 2 cameras, I jumped into a Land Rover, and we started making our way to the football stadium, the soccer stadium that the government had given us. And I knew that we could help 1,500 people. We turned the corner to the stadium, and over 7,000 people have come. I had this moment, I remember just weeping, realizing we were going to send 5,000 people away who'd come with hope. Later learned many of them had walked for more than a month with their children in the hope of seeing a doctor. First child in line was this boy named Alfred. He was 14 years old and he was suffocating to death on his own face. His mom pulls out a photo, says through a translator, "This was my son at 10. But there was no doctor, no surgeon to take him to. And now I'm afraid he's going to die." We were there to help. A couple days later, I got to scrub up and watch these amazing volunteer doctors remove Alfred's tumor, throw it in the bin, and I got to take him home a week later with his new face and watch him heal. This is what life was like every day on the ship. I would wake up in the morning, I would grab my camera, I would start meeting the patients scheduled that day. This woman, Martha Lean, told me that this tumor had grown for 8 years and people would throw rocks at her face because they thought she was spiritually cursed. And she needed a 40-minute surgery just to remove a benign mass. Took 50,000 photos that first year, and the whole time I'm bombarding my club list with these photos. So you imagine it got a little smaller. Like, unsubscribe, I did not sign up for the tumor leprosy party. But other people began to give money and began to actually volunteer on the ship as well, and I learned the power of stories to move people towards greater compassion and empathy and generosity. I signed up for a second tour. On that second tour, I got my first taste, really, of watching people drink dirty water. As I went off the ship into the villages, I learned that half the people in the country were drinking from swamps. This girl named Hawa, literally drinking water every day that could kill her. I started exploring the link between disease, the diseases and the problems we were seeing, and the lack of access to clean water. And as I told the doctors this, they said, yes, it's a huge global problem. Someone should go work on it. Why don't you go work on it? I said, okay. So I came back to New York City at 30. I was completely broke, living on a closet floor of my friend's place in Soho. I'd given all my money to mercy ships and the people I'd met around the way, and it wasn't a very good saver anyway. In nightlife, you could imagine that. But I wanted to start Charity Water, and I wanted to use my life to help bring clean water to as many people as possible. I want to talk to you about this problem today. This is not the good news segment. It'll get better. 663 million people right now are living without this basic need. But we don't respond to numbers and statistics like this. We just kind of go numb, actually. How many of you have seen 663 million anything? We can't process a number. So we've tried to tell stories of kids like John Bosco in Rwanda. This is the only water he's known his entire life. Imagine bathing in that water. Imagine cooking with that water. Imagine drinking that water. Girls like this in Honduras drinking from their rivers. Water looks more like chocolate milk. As you can imagine, there are a lot of diseases when you drink unsafe water. Everybody's heard of E. coli. Everybody's heard of cholera. Maybe you haven't heard of schistosomiasis, which is a fancy word for parasites and worms. Over 100 million people have worms crawling around their body because of the water they've had to drink. This is the stat: 52% of all disease throughout the developing world is caused by bad water and lack of sanitation. Half the sick people don't need to be sick if they just had the basic need met. This little girl in Kenya was drinking from the Molo River, and every time she would take a drink from this bottle, she would vomit on her shirt. We watched this for a few cycles in horror. We took the water away from her, promised to try to find a solution, but I wanted to know what was in the water. So I took this bottle back to New York City and I gave it to some friends at a lab, and they put it under a microscope, and they sent me this video back. And they said, that water you sent us is alive. We don't know all the things that are in it, but nobody should be drinking water that looks like this. As we would travel to the rural villages, we learned that leeches were a huge problem. Now, I bet there's no one in this room that has thought about leeches associated with their drinking water recently, but community after community would show us the leeches that they had to pick from their water. And they said the big ones, no problem. But sometimes these little leeches will get inside us. They'll crawl up and stick to the back of our throats and our children's throats. Now, if you're a parent in a rural village and your child has a leech, you have two options. You either take a stick and you try to pry the leech from the back of your kid's throat, but if you don't kill it, it'll just crawl up again. Or what a lot of people do is they give their kids diesel fuel. Just a little bit. Hopefully enough just to scald the leech. This is how most of the filtration is done. Women pouring the water through scarves, through cloth, through shirts. Learned that half the world's schools didn't have clean water or toilets, and the huge link between sanitation. Girls were dropping out because they would get their period, and there was no toilet at the school. So they'd stay home 4 or 5 days a month, fall behind in their studies, spend the rest of their days walking for water. The story that has impacted me the most viscerally over the last 10 years is a story from Ethiopia. I was there a couple years ago, staying in a crappy $4 or $5 night hotel room. And the hotel owner recognized me. I was with some donors. And he sat down and said, the work you're doing here is important. Let me tell you a story about a woman named Letta Kiros who used to live in my village. He said, I come from a very remote area. He said, one day, she was walking 8 hours for water with a heavy clay pot on her back. He said, one day at the end of her journey, before she reached her house, she slipped and she fell. And her clay pot broke. And her whole day was undone. He said she took the rope that was fastening the clay pot to her shoulders, and she tied it around the branch of a tree, and she climbed up the tree, and she tied it around her neck, and she jumped. He said, we found her body hanging from a tree. I remember thinking, no way. Tell the international donor a sad story, make him feel good about the work. But I just couldn't shake the fact of someone at the end of a long day, spilling their water and committing suicide. So I asked my wife for a pass whether I could go and live in this village completely off the grid. There's no coverage in this area for a week and experience whether it was true. I flew back to Addis. I flew up to the north to Mekelle. I drove 5 hours until the road ended. I rented this donkey, put my solar backpack on it, and then hiked another 9 hours over the mountains to reach her village. I pitched my tent next to the chief's house. And over the next week, I began to learn the story of Ledekiros Hailo. I met her mother, who vividly recounted the moment when she looked across the plain and saw them bringing a stretcher covered in a white sheet, and she knew it was her daughter, and she started to fling herself around this stone house. Injuring her back. She said, her friend is still walking for water, the girl that walked with her that day. Go visit her. So I go 4 houses down. Her friend shows me the clay pots that they used to use in the rope. She says, actually, these have been replaced by the jerry can now. It's yellow and it's a lot lighter, so this is better, but we're still walking to the same place. Her death changed nothing in our village. So we're at the top of a plateau, and she says, we got to go all the way down to the bottom of this ravine. So we walk about an hour down these steep paths. We get to the bottom, and as if that's not bad enough, then you have to wait because the yield is so low. It takes 30 minutes to fill up one of these cans with 5 gallons of water. Let me just check in with you. For us, guys, this is a toilet flush. 5 gallons. This was the source. It's a little seepage coming out of the rock. They took me up to the church where she was buried, and they said over 2,000 people came out for her funeral, and they showed me the little pile of rocks where she was buried behind the church. And before I left, they said, well, you should see the tree. And they took me to see the tree where they found her body. So I didn't know this until I went to Maida, but she was 13 at the time of her death. This was not an old lady who'd been walking her whole life. This was a 13-year-old girl. And I asked her best friend, why do you think she did it? And her friend said she would have been overcome with shame. It was her job to get the water. And not only had she let her family down, but she destroyed a valuable asset, the clay pot. I left this experience changed. Angry. You know, the water crisis is not about mind-numbing, statistics. It's about people with names and faces and hopes and dreams and families. No 13-year-old girl should be hanging herself on a tree because she spilled her water. This is the world that we live in. The good news. It's a completely solvable problem. There is not a single person on earth right now that needs to drink dirty water. This is unlike a lot of other problems in the world. We are not looking for the cure in a lab, in a test tube. We know how to bring clean water to everybody on earth. Lots of different things work in a lot of different contexts. But no one needs to drink water right now. There hasn't been the will to do it. There hasn't been the resources. But we know how to do it. And often it's as simple as $10,000. Bringing in about $1 million of drilling equipment and trucks and compressors led by local skilled drillers who can tap into the clean groundwater a couple hundred feet beneath the village. And it's one of the most amazing things to be there in that moment. It's also a frustrating thing to realize that people have died right on top of the resource that could have saved their life. 2 stories, 3 stories, 10 stories beneath them. The kids rush the drilling rig. I'll play you just a short clip of what it's like to be there. We believe this. We believe water changes everything. It's one of the most transformative ways to lift people out of extreme poverty, to transform lives. If kids have clean water and they're not drinking water with leeches in it, they're healthier. If kids have clean water at their school, you get better students. If women have hours back in their day, they earn incomes. We hear incredible stories of women selling rice at the market, selling rugs. I was just in Zambia and Zimbabwe with women selling rugs for $3 because they didn't have to walk 5 hours a day anymore. Some women tell us they're just better mothers because they get to spend more time with their families. This woman, Helen, was one of my favorite stories in Uganda. We asked her how her life was different after she got clean water. And she said, for the first time in my life, I am beautiful. And we said, what do you mean, Helen? Of course you're beautiful. She said, well, I used to have to walk a long distance and I could only get 2 jerry cans for my whole family, and I'd have a husband and 2 kids. So I always put them first. I never used the water on myself. I washed their clothes. I washed their bodies. I cooked for them. I gardened. I cleaned the house. She said, now that there's water in my village, I can wash my face and my body and my clothes, and I am beautiful. Water has the power to restore dignity. So many things that we take for granted. What I most loved working on this issue is it is one of the very few things in the entire world that everyone can agree on. Right? I mean, we fight about everything these days. We fight about religion, we fight about geography, we fight about borders, we fight about politics. But whether you're a Muslim or a Jew or a Christian or an atheist or a Mormon or a Jehovah's Witness or an agnostic, everybody could come together and fight for clean water. Whether you're a Republican, an independent, or a Democrat, everybody could agree that kids should not be dying unnecessarily of bad water. So I thought we could get a lot of people involved, a lot of people to care. So I started the organization exactly 10 years ago from the couch. I was living on the closet floor. And I was just running around at 30 years old, fresh off the Mercy ship, telling everybody I wanted to see an end to the water crisis. I wanted to see a day on earth where every human being, regardless of where they were born, had clean water to drink. As I started talking to my friends, I realized this was not going to be easy because there was this huge problem. This was the problem. People don't trust charities. Now, this is probably a more trusting group than most. Here's the data on this. 42% of Americans distrust charities. 70% of Americans, when polled, said charities waste money or badly waste money. So we have this heritage of being an amazing, generous country of generous people, but yet almost half the eligible givers feel betrayed by the system. So I realized to make a huge impact in the water crisis, we would have to do something even bigger. We would have to try and reinvent charity and create a new model where some of these disenchanted people would come back to the table. I had a couple ideas. The first is I thought you got to solve this problem around money. The number one objection people have is, well, how much of my money is actually going to go there? And what impact is it going to have? So what if we could create a way where you could never use that excuse in our organization, where 100% of every dollar, penny we ever raised would go directly to fund water projects? People are like, well, that's the stupidest thing we've ever heard. Where'd you get that idea? How will you pay for your overhead? Like, how will you have an office? I'm like, I don't know. But I opened up 2 bank accounts with $100 each, and I said, I don't know, I'm going to raise that money separately from board members and private donors, and maybe even I can get companies to pay for that someday. But we will never use the public's money except to directly fund water projects. And we're going to be so crazy about the integrity of the 100%, we will pay back credit card fees. So if someone gives $100 and we get 97 because they use their Amex, we'll make up the difference and send all $100 to the field. Second thing is, we'll prove where the money goes and just prove impact. We're not stepping on it. So we were fortunate with timing. We started the same year as Google Earth. And I realized that Google Earth was giving us a place where we could put every charity water project and be publicly transparent from day one for free. So we said, we're never going to fund work unless anyone from the general public, everybody in this room, could go to REI, buy a $50 handheld GPS device, and go visit all of our water projects over 10 years. People said, this is crazy. What if someone went to their well and it was broken? We're like, well, we'd want to freaking know that it was broken so we could fix it and figure out what went wrong. I'm not kidding, guys. You don't know what it's like to work in this sector. Third thing is I wanted to build a beautiful, epic, inspirational, imaginative brand. Nick Kristof had written in the New York Times that toothpaste is peddled with far more sophistication than all the world's life-saving causes. It's true, it's so broken. How is it possible that sugar water companies and junk food companies can spend hundreds of millions of dollars killing us and our kids, and the most important causes saving lives have anemic brands? They hire the worst designers, sometimes it seems. I better be careful. I thought you just should care about the way things look. And let's give designers a reason to leave Apple and Nike and Tesla and Virgin and use their design skills in the service of others. Most important thing about the business model was what we wouldn't do. We wouldn't send Westerners, people that look like me, over to Africa or India or Bangladesh to go drill wells. Okay? We would raise the money and the awareness. I mean, this should be obvious, but yeah. We would work through local partners. For the work to be sustainable, it had to be led by the locals. I believe that. And over time, we grew our partners. We would build their capacity. We would hire more drilling rigs and gift them to them. We would get more trucks for them, get them capacity building, but it would be led. They would be the heroes on the ground. They'd be the ones flying the flag, leading their communities forward, not us. So it started with a birthday party. That was the only thing I knew how to do 10 years ago was throw a party in a nightclub. It feels so unimaginative now. So I got the club to give open bar for an hour, and I lured 700 friends there. I said, oh, but on the way in, you have to drop $20 in this bin. And 100% of the money is going to go to build water projects. So they come for the birthday party and the open bar. And we raised $15,000 that night. And then we took 100% of the money straight to a refugee camp in northern Uganda where 31,638 people were registered and they had one well. And they were drinking from this swamp. We built a few projects and we sent them back to the 700 people. The photos, the GPS, a video saying this is what your money did. And people were blown away. Some of them didn't even remember coming to the party. They were so happy that they had and they'd made a difference, and nobody expected to hear back from a charity tossing $20 in a bin. And we said, this is the magic. Let's continue closing the loop. Let's show people the impact their sacrifice and generosity has and create a virtuous cycle. And maybe this thing can continue to grow. We try to get people to think differently about the issue and get donated media, getting TV ads donated, buses donated. We built a digital first organization. We never sent a piece of direct mail out because that was just stupid. How many of you are writing checks to organizations buying your physical mailing addresses? Come on. Okay, one. Not me too, okay? So we were the first charity to get 1 million Twitter followers because I invited myself to speak at Twitter when there were 28 employees. And we tried to build and celebrate our community around the world. Look at them. Look at the amazing things our volunteers are doing, our donors are doing, our partners are doing. Celebrating the diversity of our community and the extraordinary creative things they were doing to bring water to others in need. We partnered creatively with brands. This was a fun one. We went to Saks Fifth Avenue and said, you sell $5,000 purses. We have some water projects that cost $5,000. We should totally be working together because we're both in New York. So I think this is the craziest thing their CEO ever heard because he did not throw me out. And they wound up shooting their catalogs in water for 2 seasons and giving us the windows on Fifth Avenue and in Beverly Hills and in Chicago. And then they got their employees involved and their vendors involved. And they started calling up Tom Ford and Gucci and Prada and selling them water projects. And they raised $700,000 as a company. We started working with bigger brands for awareness. American Express actually put us on their homepage for 3 months to raise awareness for the issue. And whenever we worked with brands, we really tried to attack this language about giving back. You guys have all heard this. It makes me sick. It makes it sound as if we have pillaged and plundered to such a degree that it's finally time to throw some scraps to the poor. Why are we giving back as if we've taken out of debt, out of shame, out of obligation? Why aren't we just talking about giving? Why don't we frame generosity in the positive? So build a culture of giving in your family, in your company, in your organization. You don't need to give back. Look for ways to generously and joyfully give and share your time and your talent and your money with others. We've found a great way for people to give, and we stumbled onto this idea early on. This is one that this community here has embraced, and we said, look, you don't need your birthday. You don't need more crap on your next birthday. Nobody likes buying you things. Nobody knows what to get you. Turn your birthday into a giving moment that helps others get their most basic need, that helps them live healthier lives where they can actually have more birthdays. I thought the sticky idea would be to get people to ask for their age in dollars. So I led with my 32nd birthday and asked everyone I knew for $32. I skipped the party. I said, you'd spend that just on a taxi and tipping the bartender. 7-year-old kid in Austin, Texas starts knocking on doors asking for $7 donations. Raised 22 grand. Now, he lived in a nice neighborhood, okay? He lived in a very nice neighborhood. I'd never heard of this guy before. Adam Lambert donates his 29th birthday, tries to raise $29,000 on Twitter, winds up raising $320,000. Jack Dorsey, who created Twitter and Square, gave up 3 birthdays, raised almost 200 grand. Will and Jada Smith donated their birthdays, then asked their fans to donate birthdays. They actually came with me to drill and see the impact that they'd made. All that was cool, but really what we celebrated, what we were so excited about was 6-year-olds that were not famous, like Lori, or 16-year-olds in the middle of the country, like Maggie. One of my favorites, 89-year-old Nona Ween. Look at her mission statement. I'm turning 89, I'd like to make that possible for more people. She realizes she's lived double the life expectancy in so many of these places where we work, and if her birthday could be given in service of others so they could have more birthdays and have the chance to live to 89. And she wanted to involve her community in that. Went beyond birthdays, people started climbing mountains for charity water, trying to raise $1 a foot. People jumped out of planes. Made sailed across the Atlantic Ocean. This guy took the $10,000 that he'd saved for the ring, buys his wife a well in India, and wants to start his marriage off with an act of radical generosity and not a ring. This guy, Jesse in Atlanta, listened to Nickelback for 168 hours. Was rewarded. Even while sleeping, guys. Headphones on, blasting. Cosette is 5 years old, has a backlog of painting requests for charity water. Riley ate rice and beans for an entire month. This photo her mom sent in is profound. Her mom said Riley went on her website, saw that 4,500 kids die a day of bad water, asked her mom for paper and a pen, sat down and started writing 4,500 lines because she wanted to feel how big that number was. Maddie in Vancouver did 12 lemonade stands, one of them in the rain. At her last lemonade stand, she convinced a local band to perform on the sidewalk next to her lemonade stand. Sold over $5,600. The amazing story was that this wasn't about us. This was about these extraordinary everyday people bringing the best of themselves to this issue. Rachel Beckwith, some of you remember, from Seattle, a 9-year-old girl, saw me speak at her church. Her church had thrown a keg party for charity water. Amazing church. Raised $500,000. And she donated her 9th birthday, and she raised $220, and she was sad because she had wanted to raise $300. And right after her birthday, she was killed in a 20-car crash, which is the only fatality. And her church community came around her and all started donating $9. And then it spread to the Seattle community, and it spread across the country. Started spreading to Africa. People in Africa started donating $9 for this little girl in Seattle that cared about people getting clean water more than a birthday party or gifts. Her $220 campaign while alive went to over $1.3 million. 37,000 strangers gave. Amazing thing is, 5 years later, the 37,000 people that gave to her campaign went on to donate their birthdays, raised almost another $2 million. Rachel helped over 100,000 people get clean water from 6 while she was alive. What we realized is this is all about their story. It's the story of our community. It's the story of Rachel and Nona and Max, the story of our partners. This is not the charity water story. And if we can keep celebrating that and inviting more people in, inviting them to bring the best of themselves, their talent, their creative ideas. There's a guy here, Ryan, who saw me speak at WDS, went to Afghanistan, wrote haikus, raised thousands of dollars selling haikus while he was in Afghanistan. We've focused on using technology to show impact and show people what their money's doing, creating online products that tie each of these dollars down to the projects they fund. We started crowdsourcing drilling rigs, and we mounted GPS units to the drilling rigs so people could track them in real time, and we gave our drilling rigs Twitter accounts so they tweet their location. And then with over 20,000 projects around the world, we started losing sleep at night because we knew they were all working on day one. But what about those WDS projects from 5 years ago? So we went to Google and pitched them this crazy idea and said, what if we could build a sensor that we could install on these projects, and we would know years later not only if they were working, but how much water was flowing. Google funded a grant. It was actually the largest check they'd ever written to a nonprofit at that time for innovation, and we started building sensors and at the same time training local mechanics who could go and act on that data, the failure data, and go and bring these projects back online. We installed 3,500 in the pilot in Ethiopia. It became instantly the largest global water set of rural data set of rural water supply in the history of the world. And now what we're able to do is go back to Rachel's family. And not only does she know which wells she funded 5 years ago through her birthday campaign, and where they are and how much they cost and what it looks like in the area around it, but now we can go and show how much water is flowing 5 years later, day in, day out. And I can go to last Thursday and see that women got up at 4:41 a.m. and started taking clean water from the well. And this is amazing. On that day, over 1,600 liters of clean water. Imagine how we would value that. If you were buying it at the deli, it'd be $3,000 of water. Every day, 365 days a year, 5 years later. So this is how we see the world. We believe we have a deep responsibility to these communities, not just to kind of take the hero image and the water shoots out of the ground and give the donor a nice picture for their refrigerator, but to make sure that clean water is continuing to flow in a sustainable way. In 10 years, we've raised over $250 million now from 1 million incredibly generous people, and this is everyday people. This has not been backed by corporations. We've never taken a dollar of government money. This has really been a movement of just everyday people. We've been able to help 7.1 million people get access to clean water across 24 different countries, and today we employ 1,500 locals through our partners who are leading their communities forward every single day. As we look ahead, it's 1%. How depressing is that? 1% of the global water crisis. So as we begin this year 11, we're like, we gotta do a lot more. We wanna go faster. We wanna help more people. This year, we're gonna help 1 million people get water. That's 2,800 people every single day of the year. It's about twice the people in this room today and then tomorrow, but it's not enough. Our greatest challenge is getting people to care. If I asked you guys in this room, how many of you, have walked 8 hours to then give your child water that could kill them every day, I bet no hands go up. How many of you have been attacked by crocodiles at the water source? How many have been raped on the way to the water source? It's hard. This affects people living oceans away. So we've tried to use technology to do that. Chris talked earlier about our VR project. We filmed an 8-minute piece called The Source. And I wanted to show what would happen to a 13-year-old girl not far from where Leta Kiros lived that actually did get clean water. And we filmed a beautiful story of Salam and the 7 days where everything changed in her life. So you put on the headset and you step into her world and you see the disgusting water that she's drinking. You learn about her family. And then a couple days later, you see the rig come in and drill the well. And at the end, you see her drink clean water for the first time in her life. I thought maybe we could get people closer. We could get them to feel something. So we had this piece. And I thought, well, what if we showed it to our top donors at a dinner in New York at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, all at the same time? So this was impossible. We couldn't get 400 headsets. And finally, at the very last minute, everything came through, and we served them dinner, and then we strapped on 400 headsets to their face, and we pressed play at the same time. 8 minutes later, there was definitely some mascara running. They took the headsets down, and I asked them all for money. And they gave $2.4 million. So they helped another 240 villages. We thought, before we did that, I flew into Ethiopia just for a day to show Salam the finished film. I thought, we should get her permission. So she was walking around her hut. And at the end, she said in her local language, Konjo, which means beautiful. And I told her, we're going to use your story to help millions of other people get access to clean water. Another man walked into the office, watched that, took it down weeping, wrote a check for 40 villages to get clean water. 5 years ago, I stood on this stage and issued you guys a challenge. And at the time, it was like, hey, please give up your next birthday or do something crazy. Now, this is only what we know about, only what we could track. We know of at least 163 campaigns that raised over $200,000 because of this community. Even speakers launch campaigns. Brene Brown launched a couple campaigns, later became a friend of the organization. Sarah Peck, one of my favorites, told her friends that if she could raise $30,000 for her 30th, she'd swim naked from Alcatraz to San Francisco. Never thinking that she could raise $30,000, and of course, if you're her friend, you're gonna make sure she does. And she delivered. So many amazing stories came from the WDS community. A lot of lemonade stands, a lot of kids getting involved. And the people in this room 5 years ago impacted over 6,600 lives. And we know that it's even a greater impact than that. So this year I have a new challenge. I'll tell you where we're at. We're in our 11th year. And we've helped 7 million people get clean water. And we realize that this next decade, if we want to do more, we're going to have to approach it a little differently. The birthdays are amazing, but everybody does one. The fundraising campaigns are amazing, but people do one. So at our 10-year mark, we said, what if we could build a subscription community, people who would stick by us month in and month out? And we called it The Spring. Now, the average person in this room, you would have 11 subscriptions. You get value from all of them. Netflix, Spotify, iTunes, Hulu, you name it, Dropbox, your magazines, your newspapers. And we said, what if we could create a community where 100% of the value was passed on to others? And people could see the impact of their giving. It costs us $30 to give one person clean water. And we said, we bet there are a lot of people out there who would be able to do that every single month if they knew that every penny would go straight to people in need, if they could see that impact. So we launched that with a video at our 10th anniversary and said, we'll send these stories of the people that are getting helped to the community. We launched with a goal of 10,000. We're currently at 8,300 people from 80 countries A woman from Slovenia emailed me yesterday, sending me a picture of her view. And this is going to be a huge strategic initiative for us going forward, is to not start at zero every year and to build a group of people who will see that number come from 600 million to 500 million to 400 million to 300 million and be able to tell their kids someday that they were a part of seeing a day when everybody has clean water, because we really believe that's true. So my challenge for you guys, we set up a link, would be, there's people in this room that could give $30 a month. There's people in this room that could only give $5 a month. There might be people in this room that give $100 a month. My challenge is, if you're willing to do this, I actually would love for you to stand up and take a picture of that so that you will remember it later. If you would join the spring, if you could give at least $5 a month, would you just take a picture of that? Thank you. I heard Agape. Me too. Oh, you guys are amazing. Oh, move over. We'll also be able to track this. The impact of what happens in this room. This is the first time we've ever done this with a group of people, with a live event. We'll be able to see the impact 6 months from now, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now. It's just charitywater.org/WDS. So I'll end with this. This is what we get to do, and if you're a part of our community, if you are past part of the community, or if you join at some point in the future, this is what we get to do. We get to take kids like John Bosco from the swamp, from a condition that shouldn't exist, where their family is risking their lives every single day. And because everyday people here extend their hands over an ocean across thousands of miles, because everyday people care about the suffering of others, drilling rigs head towards villages. And local Rwandans jumped out. Heroes. Imagine being John Bosco, watching these guys coming in to serve your community. They find water, they start building the well. And less than a week later, John Bosco is drinking clean water for the first time in his life. We've been able to do this over 23,000 times. And the amazing thing now with some of these older projects is that we get to go back. So when we met John Bosco, it was 8 years ago, and he was a boy. When we went back and last visited him, he's a man. And he's gotten married and has a beautiful daughter, Jean-Marie. And we realized she never will have to drink from that swamp. The cycle of water poverty in that village was broken 8 years ago by a group of everyday people who could have just succumbed to the apathy. 660 million people, that's awful. What could we ever do about that? But people cared. We'll change the course of his family and all the families living there. I want to leave you with my favorite quote. 9 years ago, a guy walking by a bodega sent this to me. Do not be afraid of work that has no end. It's from an ancient Jewish text. Do not be afraid of work that has no end. Because if your work is in the service of others, if you are working to end inequality, injustice, the suffering of others, it will never end. That's okay. When we solve the water crisis, we're not going to drop the mic and go work at a bank. Okay? We're going to turn our community that cares on another issue. Maybe it would be shelter. Maybe it would be hunger. Some other basic need. Do not be afraid of work that has no end. I hope some of you guys will join us in ours. Thanks so much.